Joe Peta was fired from Lehman Brothers, hit by an ambulance, laid up, and had nothing to do, so he decided to start gambling on baseball, and he turned it into a book called Trading Bases, a story of Wall Street, gambling, and baseball. Joe, we often joke here on the show that there's an explosion of sports media, whether it's websites, insider knowledge, 24-hour news organizations, and all these experts. Vegas is still happily taking all of their money because no one's been able to predict the future. When you were up 41% the one year and then 14% the next year, did the bookies or Vegas start to turn down your money?
I was probably close to that in Vegas last year. One thing I learned was it's not really a viable business to be like, say, a money manager in the financial industry, because I couldn't have raised much more money than I did, and I was starting to run into limits in terms of how much I could get down on certain games. So my returns wouldn't be scalable. Let's say if I had 10 times as much money,
right,
there's no way I could have made 10 times as profit because I was running into problems there. And what I found was, I think Las Vegas, I started looking at this from an old market maker on Wall Street, and what I concluded was Vegas could expand their market, but they have to think a little bit differently. And I think they should take more of the cues from the poker boom, where they didn't actually play against the poker players. They got them all in the same room, let them bang heads with each other, and took out a little piece. And I really think there are so many model builders out there, and like you say, there's such an explosion of data and people that want to do stuff with it, and they have opinions. If I were Vegas, I would be trying to metaphorically get them all in the same room. And, so I would structure my business just a little bit differently.
It's interesting because they kind of do that on the casino floor, right? They don't care who wins the jackpot, just as long as there's money flowing through the slot machines.
That's exactly right. In the sports betting, you actually get treated like the enemy. And I understand that, but I also understand that when I traded stocks, Fidelity was always smarter than me. And so was every other mutual fund, that I traded biotech stocks. And these guys were medically credentialed, and they were doctors, and they understood the biology. But yet I was able to run a business by getting them to trade with each other, and that's a little bit of an art. And you definitely would have to approach things a little bit differently than the way, the books do now in Vegas.
So when Vegas, the pit bosses or the houses would sort of looked at you funny, did they ever come to blows? Did they ever try and break your ankles? What happened?
No, definitely never. No, I never had any situation like that. I knew that I was certainly being monitored in terms of what my plays were, and I think if I had tried to increase my action any higher, it would have been denied.
Gotcha. But the book is Trading Bases, a story of Wall Street gambling and baseball. Joe Peta, our guest. Joe, give us one or two helpful hints. Not necessarily, it's because it's more nuanced and it's much more of an art than it is science, using scientific data, I think. But give us one or two things that you sort of latched onto these last 2 years and you rode to these victories.
Sure. You know what? We can apply it even to 2013, to the 2013 season. I come in this year thinking that Toronto is very overvalued and Tampa is very undervalued. And I think it's because you really have to look at the marginal changes that have gone on with these teams. And I look at Tampa and I say, okay, people think, okay, they traded James Shields, who was their second best pitcher, and they're not going to be able to replace him. And they're right. The pitcher that they brought in is not going to be as good. Jeff Newman's going to be taking his starts. He's not as good as James Shields. But last year, James Shields did not actually have a good year. Newman can replicate that year. He has that talent skill to replicate what Shields did. And the Rays won 93 games last year. They are being discounted down to like an 85, 86 win team this year. And meanwhile, Toronto had all these flashy signings. And, Reyes and Burley and Cabrera, they're going to make that team better, but they're starting from a 70-win base. And they might be 15 wins better this year. And that's a ton. That is a huge improvement. But they are being priced like they're going to be 20 games better this year. And I don't see those marginal changes that justify that.
Joe, would you bet on one team every game and put the same amount, or would you pick and choose games and or raise or lower the amounts?
Every game is different in terms of because of the starting pitchers. It really, each game has, what I would do is come up with a win expectancy for each game, compare it to what the win expectancy was based on the Vegas line, and the larger the spread, the more that I would put down. And if it's smaller, I'd just put down a very small amount. And if there was no edge at all, the game is a pass. So it would depend on, for instance, if my model is much more higher on Adam Wainwright than, say, Vegas is, well, then just about every game Adam Wainwright pitches, I'm going to have something down. If he's also going against a pitcher that I feel is overrated in Vegas, then you've got a matchup of something that I think so over and under, and generally that becomes a bigger bet.
It's interesting because my uncle, who was a gambler per se, sitting on the beach, would say, you bet baseball, you bet the starting pitcher. And all this analysis years later, Joe Peta, you're saying bet the pitcher.
Yeah, well, that is a huge factor. What it definitely means is I might think the Rays are really undervalued this year. But on the games that they send Alex Cobb to the mound, that might be no play for me because I'm not a fan of Alex Cobb. So, yes, it is very picture dependent.
Joe, are you going to do this again this year?
I'm not. This has been an incredible 2-year sort of odyssey and a career change, if you will, that I never expected. But I have to see, whether the future is going to hold more writing or back to the financial industry. I think that'll be, that's yet to be seen.
Any movie offers for the book Trading Bases?
Not yet, although we've had some great discussions in the family because my family does get we wove into the book a little bit, and so we get to have some great discussions about, hey, who would play you?
I suspect that you've had some degenerate gamblers come out of the woodworks begging you for, give me a little bit of help here.
I have. In fact, I had a great story in Vegas where I walked by a guy one time who had my website open. From last year where I was writing essays about teams all year. And he had it open there, and once he realized, and I said to him, I was like, hey, what are you reading? And, then I said, hey, that's my stuff. And we started talking, and he's, before I knew it, I had about 24 of his buddies. Like, oh, we read your stuff all the time. Come on, give me the goods. Who do we like today?
That's one of the reasons why Vegas looked at you kind of funny. Joe Peta, the book is Trading Bases. Did you watch the games?
Oh, yeah.
Like a degenerate gambler? Did you find yourself losing control from time to time?
I found myself really enjoying watching baseball, so much baseball. For instance, I started to know entire rosters like I did when I collected baseball cards when I was 12 and 14. So that part I really enjoyed. I didn't really, as far as my attention to it, I looked at that very similar to, hey, when I traded stocks, I watched the tape all day. And I watched what stocks were doing all day. So in that sense, yes, I was watching games. The only interesting thing, would occur that is I grew up a huge Phillies fan. And, I remember my wife walked into the living room one time and she sees a game on. She kind of realizes what's going on. She said, are you rooting for the Pirates? And I sort of thought of that line from Mark Cohen in Walking in Memphis. I said, ma'am, I am tonight. So there was a little bit of that where my loyalties would change on a daily basis.
The book is Trading Bases, a story about Wall Street, gambling, and baseball, not necessarily in that order. Joe Peta. Joe Peta, thanks for checking in. Good luck down the road. And if you're ever in St. Louis, come on by, give me a tip, and I'll buy you a soda.
Will do. Thank you, McGraw. I appreciate having me on.
You got it. The book is Trading Bases, a story about Wall Street, gambling, and baseball. Joe Peta, our guest. Back in a moment on KTRS.